I still remember the exact moment my life began to unravel, though at the time I had no idea what was coming. It was a Tuesday morning in early March, the kind of gray London day where the sky seems to press down on the city like a damp blanket. I was sitting at my desk on the 4th floor of Thornton & Associates, a mid-sized financial consulting firm nestled in a sleek glass building just off Canary Wharf. I had worked there for 6 years, climbing my way from junior accountant to senior financial analyst, a title I wore with quiet pride. My coffee had gone cold beside my keyboard, and I was deep in the quarterly reports when I first noticed something that did not quite add up. It was such a small thing, really. A payment of £12,000 to a vendor I did not recognize. The name was Meridian Supply Solutions, and according to our records, we had been paying them for office supplies and maintenance services for the past 18 months. But I had been handling our vendor relationships for years, and I had never heard of Meridian Supply Solutions. I had never signed off on their invoices. I had never even seen their name until that moment. I told myself it was nothing. Companies grow. New vendors come on board. Perhaps someone in operations had brought them in while I was focused on other projects. I made a mental note to ask about it and moved on with my day. But the thing about numbers is that once you see a pattern that does not fit, you cannot unsee it. Over the next few days, I found myself returning to those payments again and again. 12,000 here, 8,000 there, 15,000 to something called Apex Consulting Group, 23,000 to Northern Infrastructure Partners. None of these names appeared in any of the vendor meetings I had attended. None of them had contracts on file in the shared drive. And when I searched for them online, I found only the barest traces of their existence. Single-page websites with stock photos, no physical addresses, no employee names, no reviews or testimonials. I remember sitting at my desk late one evening, the office empty and silent around me, staring at a spreadsheet that showed nearly £400,000 in payments to these phantom companies over the past 2 years. My hands were trembling slightly. I did not want to believe what the numbers were telling me, but I had been an accountant long enough to know that money does not lie. Someone was stealing from the company. Someone was funneling hundreds of thousands of pounds into shell companies, and they had been doing it right under everyone's noses. The rational part of my brain told me to go straight to Richard. Richard Thornton was the founder and managing director of the firm, the man who had hired me 6 years ago, who had promoted me twice, who had told me at last year's Christmas party that I was the most reliable person on his team. He was charming and confident, the kind of leader who remembered everyone's birthdays and always knew exactly what to say to make you feel valued. I trusted him completely. But something held me back. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the fact that these payments had been approved by someone with senior access, someone who could authorize transactions without additional oversight. There were only 3 people in the company with that level of authority: Richard, the CFO, Patricia Newell, and myself. Patricia had retired 8 months ago. Her replacement, a nervous young man named David Chen, had only been in the role for 5 months and did not yet have full system access. That left Richard. And me. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in my small flat in Hackney, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that there had to be another explanation. Richard was wealthy. His family had money. He drove a Jaguar and lived in a beautiful townhouse in Chelsea. Why would he need to steal from his own company? It made no sense, but the numbers did not lie. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to investigate quietly, to gather more information before saying anything to anyone. I told myself I was being responsible, making sure I had all the facts before making accusations that could destroy someone's reputation. But looking back, I think part of me already knew the truth. I just was not ready to face it yet. I started by pulling every invoice and payment record I could find related to the suspicious vendors. I worked late into the evenings, long after everyone else had gone home, combing through years of financial data. I created a separate folder on my personal laptop, backing up everything I found. I told myself it was just for safekeeping, but really I was building a case. What I found made my stomach turn. The payments to these phantom companies had started almost exactly 2 years ago, just 3 months after I had been promoted to senior financial analyst. They were small at first, 5,000 here, 8,000 there, easy to overlook in the flood of legitimate transactions that flowed through our accounts every month. But over time, they had grown larger and more frequent. By my calculations, nearly £700,000 had been siphoned out of the company, and every single payment had been approved using my access credentials. I remember the moment I discovered that. I was sitting in my flat, my laptop open on the kitchen table, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I checked the system logs again and again, hoping I had made a mistake, but the evidence was undeniable. The payments had been authorized from my account, using my login during hours when I was supposedly at my desk. But I had not made those payments. I had never even heard of these companies until a week ago. Someone had used my credentials. Someone had accessed my account and authorized these transactions, knowing that if anyone ever looked closely, all the evidence would point to me. For a long moment, I could not breathe. The walls of my small kitchen seemed to close in around me, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I was being framed. Someone was setting me up to take the fall for their crimes, and they had been doing it for 2 years without my knowledge. The question was, who? I spent the next several days in a fog of paranoia and fear. I went to work each morning and smiled at my colleagues, attended meetings, answered emails, all while my mind raced with terrible possibilities. I watched everyone around me with new eyes, searching for signs of guilt or deception. The friendly security guard who always wished me good morning, the junior accountants who asked me for advice on their reports, the receptionist who complimented my scarf. Any of them could be involved. Any of them could be watching me, waiting to see if I had discovered the truth. But my suspicion kept returning to Richard. He was the only person with the access and authority to pull off something like this. He could have obtained my login credentials through any number of means. He could have watched over my shoulder as I typed my password. He could have accessed the IT records. He could have simply asked the system administrator for a reset, claiming he needed to check something urgent. But I needed proof. Accusations without evidence would destroy me, not him. I started paying closer attention to Richard's behavior. I noticed things I had overlooked before. The way he always seemed to know exactly what was happening in the finance department, even on projects he was not directly involved in. The way he would sometimes linger near my desk, asking casual questions about the reports I was working on. The way he had insisted, 6 months ago, that I start using a new password format for security reasons, a format that would be easier to guess. I noticed how he looked at me sometimes, when he thought I was not paying attention. There was something calculating in his eyes, something cold beneath the warmth of his smile. I had always thought he was evaluating my work, making sure I was meeting his high standards. Now I wondered if he was evaluating something else entirely, whether I was still useful, whether I had noticed anything suspicious, whether it was time to close the trap. 3 weeks after I first discovered the discrepancies, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. I had been searching through old emails, looking for any communication that might reference the phantom vendors, when I stumbled across a folder I had never seen before. It was buried deep in the shared drive, hidden inside a series of innocuously named subfolders: Administrative, Archives, Legacy, Backup, MISC. Inside was a single document titled EC Performance Review 2023, my initials, a performance review from a year ago. But when I opened the file, it was not a performance review at all. It was a detailed timeline of every suspicious payment, complete with dates, amounts, and notations about which account had authorized them. My account. There were also notes about my behavior, my schedule, my access patterns. Observations about when I arrived at work and when I left. Records of the days I had called in sick. Someone had been watching me. Someone had been documenting my movements for over a year, building a case that would make me look guilty. At the bottom of the document was a single line that made my blood run cold. Phase 2 complete. Ready for Phase 3 on executive approval. I did not know what Phase 3 was, but I knew I could not wait to find out. That night, I made a copy of everything. I transferred files to an encrypted USB drive and hid it in a box of old photographs at the back of my closet. I changed my passwords on every account I owned, personal and professional. I started keeping a detailed journal of everything I observed, every conversation, every email, every suspicious glance. And I reached out to the one person at the company I thought I might be able to trust. Marcus Webb worked in IT. He was quiet and unassuming, the kind of person who blended into the background at company events. We had spoken perhaps a dozen times in the 6 years I had worked at Thornton & Associates, mostly about technical issues with my computer or requests for access to archived files. But I had always sensed a decency in him, a quiet integrity that set him apart from the office politicians and climbers who populated the firm. I found him in the break room one afternoon, eating a sandwich and reading something on his phone. I poured myself a coffee I did not want and sat down across from him. "Marcus, can I ask you something, hypothetically?" He looked up, his expression curious but guarded. "Depends on the hypothetical. If someone wanted to access another person's login credentials, how would they do it? Not that I'm planning anything," I added quickly. "Just curious about security vulnerabilities." Marcus studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through my casual tone. "There are a few ways," he said slowly. "Keyloggers on the physical machine, phishing emails that trick people into entering their passwords on fake sites, social engineering, convincing someone in IT to reset a password, or just good old-fashioned shoulder surfing, watching someone type. And would there be any way to tell? If someone had accessed my account without my knowledge?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a very specific hypothetical." I did not answer. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, Marcus sighed and set down his sandwich. "Look, I don't know what's going on, and I'm not sure I want to know. But if you're worried about unauthorized access to your account, I can run some diagnostics. Check the login logs, see if there's anything unusual. Off the record." "Off the record," I repeated. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've worked here for 12 years, and I've seen things." He glanced around the empty break room, lowering his voice. "Things that made me uncomfortable. Things I probably should have reported but didn't because I needed this job and I didn't want to make waves. If something's wrong, I'd rather know about it." I felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Marcus. Truly. Don't thank me yet. I haven't found anything." He paused. "But I'll look. Give me a few days." Those few days were some of the longest of my life. I went through the motions at work, attending meetings and filing reports and making small talk with colleagues, all while my nerves screamed with tension. Every time Richard walked past my desk, I had to fight the urge to flinch. Every time my computer made an unexpected sound, my heart leaped into my throat. I started having nightmares. In one recurring dream, I was sitting in a courtroom, my hands shackled, while a judge read out a list of crimes I had not committed. Richard sat in the gallery, watching with that cold smile, and no matter how loudly I protested my innocence, no one could hear me. I woke from these dreams gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. On the 4th day, Marcus caught my eye across the office and gave a small nod toward the stairwell. I waited 5 minutes, then made my way to the fire escape where he was waiting. "You were right to be worried," he said without preamble. "There have been multiple logins to your account from IP addresses that don't match your usual patterns. Mostly late at night or early morning, Times when you weren't in the building. Whoever did this was careful, but they weren't perfect. Can you tell who it was? Marcus hesitated. Not directly. They used a VPN to mask their location. But I did some digging into the network architecture, and I found something interesting. The VPN they used, it's not a public service. It's a private server. And that server is registered to a company called Meridian Holdings. Meridian, the same name as one of the phantom vendors, Meridian Supply Solutions. There's more, Marcus continued. I found references to that server in some old system configuration files. It was set up about 2.5 years ago, right around the time you got promoted. And the authorization for the server setup came directly from Richard's office. I leaned against the cold concrete wall, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. He's been planning this for years. It looks that way. Marcus's voice was grim. Emily, I don't know exactly what's going on, but whatever it is, you need to be very careful. If Richard is behind this, he has resources and connections that you don't. He can make things very difficult for you. I know. I closed my eyes, trying to think through the panic. I need more evidence, something that directly ties him to the fraud, not just circumstantial connections. There might be a way. Marcus glanced around nervously, making sure we were still alone. The server I found, it has backup logs, transaction records, authorization codes, timestamps. If I can get access to those logs, we might be able to prove that the payments were made from that server, not from your actual workstation. It won't prove Richard did it directly, but it will prove that someone else was using your credentials from a remote location. Can you do that? Get access? Maybe, but it's risky. If I'm caught poking around in servers I'm not supposed to access, I'll lose my job. Possibly worse. I looked at him, this quiet man who owed me nothing, who was risking everything to help me. Marcus, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. He met my eyes, and I saw a resolve there that surprised me. I told you, I've seen things at this company that made me uncomfortable. I looked the other way because it was easier. I'm tired of looking the other way. Why? Why now? He was quiet for a moment. My daughter, he said finally. She's 14. Last year she was bullied at school. Badly. The other kids spread rumors about her, said she had done things she hadn't done. The school did nothing. The other parents did nothing. Everyone just looked the other way because it was easier than getting involved. His voice grew thick with emotion. She hurt herself. She's okay now, but it was close. And I realized that I had been just as guilty as those parents, just as guilty as that school. Looking the other way because it was convenient. Not wanting to make waves. I swore I would never do that again. So no, Emily, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me, to prove to myself that I'm not that person anymore. I could not speak. I just reached out and squeezed his hand, hoping he understood what I could not put into words. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and I worked in secret, communicating through encrypted messaging apps and meeting in locations far from the office. He slowly gathered evidence from the hidden server, downloading transaction logs and authorization records bit by bit, careful not to trigger any alarms. Meanwhile, I continued my own investigation. I tracked down information about the phantom companies, Meridian Supply Solutions, Apex Consulting Group, Northern Infrastructure Partners, and discovered that they were all registered to the same business address, a virtual office in Manchester that existed only on paper. The companies had no employees, no physical presence, no actual operations. They were nothing but shells, created to receive stolen money, and the money, once it landed in those shell company accounts, did not stay there long. I traced transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, then to numbered accounts in Switzerland, then to investment portfolios that seemed to exist in a financial gray zone, impossible to access without the right passwords and authorization codes. The total amount stolen, as best I could calculate, was approaching £1 million. I also discovered something else. Something that made the whole conspiracy feel even more sinister. The timing of the fraud had not been random. It had started shortly after Patricia Newell, the former CFO, had announced her intention to retire. Patricia had been the firm's financial watchdog for nearly 2 decades, the one person with the knowledge and authority to spot irregularities in the accounts. With her departure imminent, someone had seen an opportunity. And my promotion, which I had always thought was a reward for my hard work and dedication, now looked like something very different. They had needed a fall guy, someone with enough access to authorize large transactions, but not enough power to protect themselves when things went wrong. Someone trustworthy and reliable, whose good reputation would make the eventual accusations even more devastating. They had chosen me. I tried to imagine Richard sitting in his corner office, looking out at the London skyline, making the decision to destroy my life. Had he felt any guilt? Any hesitation? Or had I simply been a convenient sacrifice, a name on an organizational chart, a pawn in a game I did not even know was being played? The answer came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday afternoon, about 3 weeks after I had first discovered the discrepancies. I was at my desk, pretending to work on a quarterly projection, when Richard appeared beside me. He was smiling, that warm, confident smile that had always made me feel valued and appreciated. "Emily, do you have a moment? I'd like to discuss something in my office." My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Of course. Let me just save this file." I followed him across the open floor, past the desks of my colleagues, past the glass-walled conference rooms, past the reception area where Mina, the receptionist, gave me a friendly wave. Richard's office was at the far corner of the floor, with windows overlooking the Thames. It was a beautiful space, tastefully decorated with modern art and leather furniture, a testament to his success and status. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. "Emily, I'll get straight to the point. I've been reviewing some of our financial records, and I've noticed some irregularities." My blood went cold. Irregularities? Yes, payments to vendors I'm not familiar with, large sums of money leaving the company without proper documentation. He leaned forward, his expression grave. "I'm not making any accusations, but these payments were authorized from your account. I need to understand what's been happening." For a moment, I could not breathe. This was it. This was phase 3. He was going to accuse me of fraud, here and now, and I had no way to defend myself without revealing that I knew about his scheme. But something in me, some survival instinct I did not know I possessed, made me pause, made me think. Richard did not know what I had discovered. He did not know about Marcus, about the server logs, about the evidence we had been gathering. As far as he was concerned, I was still in the dark, still the oblivious fall guy he had chosen 2 years ago. I could use that. "I don't understand," I said, letting my voice tremble slightly. "What payments? I haven't authorized anything unusual." "I was afraid you might say that." Richard sighed heavily, the picture of a reluctant boss forced to confront a trusted employee. "Emily, I've asked our external auditors to conduct a preliminary review. They've found evidence suggesting that someone has been embezzling funds from the company, nearly £1 million over the past 2 years. £1 million? I let my eyes go wide, let my mouth fall open in shock. That's impossible. I would have noticed something like that. Would you? You've been very busy lately. Perhaps you missed some things." His voice was gentle, almost sympathetic, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. "The auditors believe the fraud was committed using your access credentials. They've found login records, authorization codes, a paper trail that leads directly to your account." "But I didn't do this," I whispered. "Richard, you know me. You've known me for 6 years. I would never steal from the company." "I want to believe that, Emily. I really do." He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. but the evidence is quite compelling. I'm afraid I'm going to have to suspend you pending a full investigation. I'll need your access badge and your laptop." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch, letting him think I was devastated and confused. Inside, my mind was racing. He was making his move, but he was doing it carefully, officially, covering himself with auditors and investigations. He wanted this to look legitimate. He wanted everyone to believe that he had discovered the fraud and taken appropriate action, that he was the victim of a rogue employee rather than the architect of the whole scheme. But he did not know that I had evidence of my own, evidence that could expose everything. "Richard," I said slowly, "before you suspend me, I need to tell you something." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes?" "I've been noticing the same discrepancies. I started looking into them a few weeks ago, trying to figure out what was happening." I watched his face carefully, looking for any flicker of alarm. "I was planning to bring it to your attention, but I wanted to make sure I had all the facts first." "Is that so?" His voice was casual, but I saw something tighten in his expression. "And what did you discover?" "Nothing conclusive, just questions." I shrugged helplessly. I didn't want to make accusations without evidence. I thought maybe there was an innocent explanation. Richard studied me for a long moment, and I could almost see the gears turning in his mind. Was I genuinely confused, or was I playing him? How much did I actually know? Was I a threat that needed to be handled more aggressively, or just a convenient scapegoat who would go quietly? "I appreciate your diligence, Emily," he said finally, "but I'm afraid the situation is out of my hands now. The auditors have already begun their work. It's best if you cooperate fully and let the investigation run its course. If you're innocent, the truth will come out." If I'm innocent. As if there was any doubt. As if he didn't know exactly what had happened and who was responsible. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab him by his expensive silk tie and shake the truth out of him. But I forced myself to stay calm, to play the role of the confused and frightened employee he expected me to be. "Of course," I said quietly. "I'll cooperate completely. I have nothing to hide." "I'm glad to hear it." Richard stood, signaling that our meeting was over. "Please clear out your personal belongings from your desk. Security will escort you out of the building. I'm sorry it has to be this way, Emily. I truly am." I walked out of his office on trembling legs, past the curious stares of my colleagues, past the whispered questions I pretended not to hear. Security was waiting at my desk, a grim-faced man named Thompson who had always been friendly, but now looked at me like I was a criminal. I gathered my things in silence. A photo of my parents, a small cactus I had kept by my monitor, a coffee mug my sister had given me for my birthday. Pathetic little remnants of the life I had built here, the career I had worked so hard to achieve. Thompson walked me to the elevator, then down to the lobby, then out through the revolving doors onto the street. The March wind was bitter, cutting through my coat, but I barely felt it. I stood on the pavement and watched the glass doors close behind me, sealing me off from everything I had known. It was raining by the time I got home, a cold drizzle that soaked through my clothes and plastered my hair to my face. I sat on the floor of my flat, surrounded by my sad little box of belongings, and tried to process what had just happened. I had been suspended, accused of embezzlement, escorted out of the building like a common criminal, and Richard Thornton, the man who had orchestrated the whole thing, was sitting in his corner office looking out at the Thames, probably already composing the press release that would destroy my reputation. But I was not finished. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Marcus. "It's happening. He's made his move." The reply came within seconds. "I know. I heard. Are you okay?" "No," I typed, "but I'm not giving up. How close are we to having everything we need?" "Very close. A few more days, maybe less. But Emily, if he's going to the auditors, you might not have a few more days." "I know. I stared at the screen, thinking, then I'm going to have to speed things up. What are you going to do? I did not answer right away. The plan that was forming in my mind was risky, maybe even reckless. But I was out of options and out of time. If I waited for the auditors to complete their investigation, the evidence Marcus was gathering might be worthless. The narrative would already be set. I would already be convicted in the court of public opinion. I needed to take control of the story. I needed to expose Richard before he could finish exposing me. I'm going to find the final piece of the puzzle, I typed. The one thing that ties Richard directly to the money. And what is that? I thought about everything I had discovered. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the hidden server, the authorization codes. All of it pointed to Richard, but none of it was quite enough. He was too careful, too insulated. He had created layer upon layer of plausible deniability. But there was one thing he could not fake. One thing that would prove beyond any doubt that he was the mastermind behind the fraud. The money itself. Nearly £1 million had been stolen from Thornton and Associates. That money had not vanished into thin air. It was somewhere, sitting in accounts that Richard controlled, funding a lifestyle or an investment or an escape plan that he thought no one would ever discover. If I could find that money, if I could trace it directly to Richard's personal assets, then all his careful planning would be worthless. He could not claim that someone had framed him. He could not pretend to be an innocent victim. The money would tell the truth. The money, I typed to Marcus. I need to find where the money went. That's going to be hard. Those offshore accounts are nearly impossible to access. I know, but there might be another way. I thought about Richard, about his expensive suits and his Jaguar and his townhouse in Chelsea. I thought about his wife Helena, an elegant woman I had met at company events, always dripping with jewelry. I thought about his children, teenagers now, who attended expensive private schools. I thought about the vacations he mentioned casually in meetings, the villa in Tuscany, the yacht in Monaco. Richard Thornton lived like a man with unlimited resources. But his salary, as generous as it was, could not account for all of that. The firm was profitable, but not spectacularly so. His ownership stake was substantial, but not enormous. Where was all that money coming from? The answer was obvious now. He had been funding his extravagant lifestyle with stolen money, probably for years. The fraud I had discovered might be just the latest chapter in a much longer story. And if that was true, there might be a trail. Records of purchases that did not match his legitimate income. Assets that could not be explained by his salary. Financial breadcrumbs that would lead me directly to the stolen funds. But how could I access that information? I was not a forensic investigator. I did not have the resources or the legal authority to dig into Richard's personal finances, unless someone else did it for me. The next morning, I made a phone call. Sophie Harding was a junior accountant at Thornton and Associates, a bright young woman I had mentored during her first year at the firm. She was ambitious and talented, with a sharp eye for numbers and an even sharper instinct for office politics. I had always liked her, though I kept my distance from most of my colleagues. In a company like ours, too much familiarity could be dangerous. But Sophie had one quality that made her invaluable now. She was discreet. In the year I had known her, I had never heard her gossip about colleagues or share confidential information. She kept her head down and did her work, and she had a way of observing things without drawing attention to herself. She answered on the third ring. "Emily, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. I don't understand how—" "Sophie, I need your help." I cut her off, keeping my voice low even though I was alone in my flat. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I don't have anyone else I can trust." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of help?" "I need information about Richard's personal finances. Anything you can find without raising suspicions." Another pause, longer this time. "Emily, that's a serious request. If I get caught, I know, and I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. But Sophie, I'm being framed. Richard is behind this, and if I can't prove it, I'm going to prison for crimes I didn't commit." The silence stretched out, and I could imagine Sophie weighing her options, calculating the risks. I had not given her much to go on, just the word of a suspended colleague facing fraud accusations. She had every reason to refuse, but she didn't. "I always thought there was something off about him," she said quietly. "The way he looks at people, like we're pieces on a chessboard." She took a breath. "What exactly do you need?" The relief that flooded through me was almost overwhelming. "Anything related to his personal spending? Receipts he submitted for reimbursement? References to properties or investments he's mentioned? Travel expenses that seem excessive? Anything that doesn't match what his salary should support?" "That's going to take time, and I'll have to be careful." "I know, just do what you can." I hesitated, then added, "Sophie, if this goes wrong, if you get caught, I'll take full responsibility. I'll say I tricked you or coerced you. You don't have to take the fall for me." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Her voice was steady now, resolved. "I'll be in touch." The next few days were agony. I could not go to work, could not access my usual sources of information, could barely leave my flat without feeling like I was being watched. The investigation was ongoing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Richard's auditors turned their findings into formal accusations. Marcus sent me updates when he could, encrypted messages with technical details I barely understood. He was making progress on the server logs, finding more evidence that the fraudulent payments had originated from a remote location rather than my workstation. But it was slow work, complicated by the layers of security and deception that Richard had built into the system. And then, on the 5th day after my suspension, Sophie sent me a message that changed everything. "Check your email." I found something. I opened my laptop with trembling hands and navigated to the secure email account we had set up for this purpose. There was a new message from Sophie, containing nothing but a series of attachments. The first was a scanned expense report from 6 months ago. Richard had submitted receipts for a business trip to Geneva, claiming thousands of pounds in flights, hotels, and meals. But Sophie had cross-referenced the dates with his calendar, and there was no record of any meetings in Geneva during that time. The trip appeared to be purely personal. The second was a copy of an internal email, forwarded by accident to a shared folder where Sophie had found it. In the email, Richard discussed the purchase of a property in Portugal with his personal accountant, mentioning that the payment would come from his consulting income, a term that made no sense given that Richard did not do any consulting outside the firm. The third attachment was the most damning of all. It was a partial bank statement, obtained through means Sophie did not explain, showing a transfer of £200,000 from an account in the Cayman Islands to a British property developer. The name on the account was not Richard Thornton. It was a company called Meridian Holdings, the same name as the VPN server Marcus had discovered, the same Meridian that had been receiving fraudulent payments from Thornton and Associates for 2 years. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the connection we needed. Richard had been funneling stolen money into Meridian Holdings, then using that money to fund personal purchases, luxury properties, expensive trips, all the trappings of a lifestyle he could not have afforded on his legitimate income. He had been careful, incredibly careful. But he had made one mistake. He had used the same shell company infrastructure for both the fraud and his personal spending, creating a trail that connected everything together. I forwarded the documents to Marcus with a single message. "Can you verify this?" His response came an hour later. Verified. The Meridian Holdings account matches the server we found. The transfer dates correlate with the fraudulent payments from our company accounts. Richard Thornton is the only authorized signatory on the Meridian Holdings corporate documents. And just like that, we had him. But I knew that evidence alone would not be enough. Richard had resources, connections, lawyers who could tie up any legal proceeding for years. He could claim the documents were forged, the evidence fabricated. He could turn the narrative around, accuse me of trying to frame him out of desperation. I needed something more. Something public. Something that would make it impossible for him to spin his way out. I needed to expose him in a way that everyone would see. The next morning, I made another call. This one was to a journalist named Claire Ashworth, an investigative reporter for a major financial publication who had built her career exposing corporate fraud. I had never met her, but I had read her work for years, admiring her tenacity and her commitment to the truth. This is Claire Ashworth. Ms. Ashworth, my name is Emily Carter. I have information about a fraud scheme at Thornton & Associates, a financial consulting firm in London. Nearly £1 million has been stolen, and the managing director is trying to frame me for crimes he committed. There was a moment of silence. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Carter. I have evidence. Bank statements, server logs, expense reports, everything you need to verify the story. I can send it all to you, with one condition. And what's that? You let me tell my side before you publish. I want the world to know the truth about what Richard Thornton did to me. Claire Ashworth was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. Send me what you have. I'll review it and get back to you within 48 hours. But I'm not making any promises. If the evidence doesn't hold up, I won't publish a story. Understood. I spent the next several hours compiling everything. The payment records, the shell company registrations, the server logs from Marcus, the expense reports from Sophie, the bank statement showing the transfer from Meridian Holdings. I organized it all into a coherent narrative, adding context and explanation where needed, and I wrote my own account. Everything that had happened from the moment I first noticed the discrepancies, to my investigation, to Richard's attempt to frame me. I held nothing back. I described the terror I had felt, the sleepless nights, the crushing weight of knowing that someone I trusted was trying to destroy me. I sent it all to Claire Ashworth and waited. The next day, I received a call from Richard's lawyers. It was a formal notice, informing me that Thornton & Associates was pursuing criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. I was to surrender myself to the police within 48 hours or face arrest. My assets would be frozen pending investigation. I was advised to retain legal counsel immediately. I hung up the phone and sat in my flat, staring at the wall. This was it. Richard was going for the kill. He must have sensed that something was wrong, that his carefully laid plans were unraveling. He was trying to finish me before I could finish him, but he was too late. That evening, Claire Ashworth called me back. Ms. Carter, I've reviewed your materials with my research team. We believe your evidence is credible. We're going to run the story. When? Tomorrow morning, front page of our digital edition, with a follow-up in print the day after. I should warn you, once this goes public, your life is going to change dramatically. Are you prepared for that? I thought about everything I had been through, the fear and the doubt and the rage, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being hunted, trapped, marked for destruction by someone I had trusted. I've been preparing for this for weeks, I said. I'm ready. The story broke at 6 o'clock the next morning. By 9 o'clock, it was the most read article on every major news site in Britain. By noon, it had gone international. Financial consulting firm, managing director accused of £1 million fraud, insider claims she was framed by boss. Evidence points to elaborate embezzlement scheme. Claire Ashworth had done her job brilliantly. The article laid out everything: the phantom companies, the fraudulent payments, the hidden server, the offshore accounts, the connection to Meridian Holdings. It included quotes from anonymous sources within the company who confirmed that Richard Thornton had a reputation for secrecy and control. It documented his lavish lifestyle and questioned how he could afford it on his stated income. And at the center of it all was my account. My words, my experience, my fight to clear my name and expose the truth. I watched the news from my flat, seeing Richard's face on screen after screen. He looked shell-shocked in the photographs, caught off guard by reporters shouting questions as he tried to enter his Chelsea townhouse. His wife Helena stood beside him, her expression frozen, her jewelry glinting in the camera flashes. The police moved quickly. By that afternoon, Richard had been brought in for questioning. His assets were frozen. Thornton and Associates issued a statement announcing his immediate suspension and expressing shock at the allegations. I received calls from journalists, from lawyers, from old colleagues who wanted to apologize for ever doubting me. I received messages of support from people I had never met, strangers who had read my story and believed me. And I received a call from Marcus. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Or Sophie. You both risked everything to help me." "It was worth it." He paused. "I looked my daughter in the eye last night and told her I helped catch a bad guy. She said I was her hero. That's worth more than any job." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The police investigation expanded, uncovering evidence that Richard's fraud had been going on for much longer than I had realized. The £1 million I had traced was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the previous decade, he had stolen nearly £5 million from various companies he had been associated with, using the same shell company infrastructure and the same technique of framing innocent employees when suspicion arose. I was not his first victim. I was just the first one who had fought back. Richard Thornton was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. His trial was scheduled for the following year. His wife filed for divorce. His children changed their surnames. The beautiful townhouse in Chelsea was seized by the government. The villa in Tuscany was sold to pay legal fees. And I was offered my job back. The new management at Thornton and Associates, a team of partners who had been appalled to discover what Richard had been doing, called me personally to apologize. They offered me a promotion, a raise, a corner office of my own. They wanted me to come back and help rebuild the company's reputation. I said no. It was a hard decision. I had given 6 years of my life to that firm. I had built my career there, made friends there, poured my heart into my work there. But I could not walk those halls again without remembering the terror of those weeks, the feeling of being hunted by the man who was supposed to protect me. Instead, I accepted an offer from a different firm, a smaller company with a reputation for integrity and transparency. Sophie came with me, eager to escape the shadow of the scandal. Marcus left Thornton and Associates a few months later, taking a position with a cybersecurity firm where his skills were valued and his conscience was clear. We kept in touch. We became friends, the three of us bound together by the experience we had shared. Every year, on the anniversary of the article's publication, we meet for dinner and raise a glass to the truth. Richard Thornton's trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on the second day, recounting everything that had happened in careful detail. Richard sat in the defendant's box and watched me with those cold, calculating eyes, but he could not touch me anymore. The trap he had built to destroy me had been turned against him, and there was no escape. He was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison, calling his crimes a calculated and sustained betrayal of trust that caused immeasurable harm to innocent people. I watched him being led away in handcuffs, and I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but a kind of quiet relief. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. But even as I walked out of that courtroom, I knew that some wounds never fully heal. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that someone is watching me, waiting to strike. I still flinch when I see men in expensive suits walking confidently through glass-walled offices. I still find it hard to trust, hard to believe that the people around me are who they claim to be. Richard Thornton took something from me that I will never get back. He took my sense of safety, my belief that the world is fundamentally fair, my faith in the people who are supposed to have authority over us. He showed me how easily the powerful can crush the powerless, how institutions designed to protect us can be turned into weapons. But he also taught me something valuable. He taught me that I am stronger than I ever knew, that when everything was taken from me, when I was alone and afraid and facing destruction, I found the courage to fight back. I found allies in unexpected places. I found the truth, and I used it. And now, sitting in my new office at my new company, looking out at a different view of London, I know that I will never be a victim again. I have learned how to protect myself. I have learned how to spot the predators who hide behind charming smiles and expensive suits. I have learned that the best defense against lies is the relentless pursuit of truth. Richard Thornton tried to destroy me. He had years to plan, millions of pounds at his disposal, and every advantage that power and privilege could provide. But I had something he could not buy or steal. I had integrity. I had determination. I had the refusal to go down without a fight. And in the end, that was enough. The story of what happened to me has spread far beyond the original news coverage. I have been interviewed by podcasts and documentaries. I have spoken at conferences about corporate fraud and whistleblower protection. I have become, in a strange way, a symbol of what happens when ordinary people stand up to corruption. I did not ask for this role. I would have been happy to live my quiet life, doing my work, paying my rent, visiting my parents on weekends. But fate had other plans. Richard Thornton chose me to be his victim, and in doing so, he turned me into something he never anticipated: a fighter. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not noticed that first discrepancy, that single payment to Meridian Supply Solutions that started everything. Would Richard have succeeded in framing me? Would I be in prison right now, protesting my innocence to deaf ears? Would he have moved on to his next victim, his next scheme, his next betrayal? I will never know. All I know is that I did notice. I did investigate. I did not look away. And because of that, justice was served. The last time I saw Richard Thornton was at his sentencing hearing. As he was led past me toward the prison van, he paused and looked at me. His face was gray and drawn, stripped of all the confidence and charm that had once made him so formidable. He looked like what he was, a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. "You ruined me," he said softly. I met his eyes without flinching. "No, Richard, you ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone knew it." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the hatred burning behind his eyes. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like respect. Then the guards pulled him away, and the van doors closed, and Richard Thornton disappeared from my life forever. I walked out of the courthouse into the London sunshine, and I felt the weight of the past year finally begin to lift from my shoulders. It was over. The nightmare was over. But I knew that for others, the nightmare was just beginning. Somewhere out there, in offices and boardrooms and glass towers across the world, other predators were laying their traps, choosing their victims, building elaborate schemes to steal and deceive and betray. And somewhere out there, other people like me were starting to notice that something did not quite add up. I hoped they would find the courage to investigate. I hoped they would find allies to help them. I hoped they would not give up, no matter how frightening and overwhelming the situation became. Because the truth is a powerful thing. It can expose the deepest lies. It can bring down the most powerful people. It can set the innocent free and bring the guilty to justice. I know this because I lived it. I was framed for fraud by my own boss, and I fought back, and I won. And if anyone reading this ever finds themselves in a similar situation, trapped and terrified and marked for destruction by someone they trusted, I want them to know one thing. You are stronger than you think. The truth is on your side. And if you fight for it, really fight for it with everything you have, you can win. Richard Thornton bet everything on the assumption that I would go quietly, that I would accept my fate, that I would be too afraid and too powerless to resist. He was wrong, and that mistake cost him everything. Some nights, even now, I dream about that first moment of discovery, sitting at my desk with my cold coffee, staring at a payment to a company I had never heard of. In the dream, I sometimes make a different choice. I ignore the discrepancy. I look away. I tell myself it is not my problem. And in the dream, I lose. I am arrested, convicted, imprisoned. My name is destroyed. My life is ruined. Richard Thornton walks free, richer than ever, searching for his next victim. I always wake from these dreams grateful that I made a different choice. Grateful that I listened to my instincts. Grateful that I found Marcus and Sophie and Claire Ashworth. Grateful that the truth prevailed, because it so easily could have gone the other way. But it didn't. And that is the lesson I want everyone to take from my story. Not that justice is inevitable, because it is not. Not that the truth always wins, because sometimes it doesn't. But that we have more power than we know. That even when we feel trapped and helpless, we have choices. And that the choices we make in our darkest moments define who we really are. Richard Thornton saw me as a pawn, a convenient scapegoat, a means to an end. He underestimated me completely. And that was his biggest mistake. I am no longer the naive, trusting employee who walked into Thornton & Associates 6 years ago, eager to prove herself and grateful for every opportunity. That version of me died in the weeks after my suspension, burned away by fear and rage and determination.